Hello. Let us start with a daily dose of poetry, an offering from Giselle James called Local Woman Does Woman Things. She bleeds and gets called beautiful by men, luxuriates the wonder of womanhood, curves in new ways with each lunar phase. She births language in the mirror's gaze, knows violence as a lover, finds a way to form a fist with gel-X nails. My body does forgiving things. She does laborious things, grieves what gestates loss, sees the gaps in her pay, sees who is missing and murdered beside her. She is the fantasy in someone else's head. She is my choice. She is my vessel down any available avenue. She has a history of harrowing hikes home. My body was born in the shadow of a man, produces significant levels of estrogen, drips fish, fears current infection. She takes preemptive care, so she can open herself freely again. She tells her girlfriends how tender her breasts are becoming. My body receives enthusiastically. She claims penetration as pinnacle. She is a whole. She is used. She dodges danger daily. She does become a tool. She wrenches herself around vice with fixation. My body romances. She cannot currently cultivate her lush in the liminal. My body does what she needs and names it necessary. Local Woman Does Woman Things by Giselle James from her collection, Local Woman. Hello. Hello, it has been so very long because I was sick. I was sick for a week and that was unpleasant. But now I'm back and I'm alive and I've emerged from the depths of illness with a new vital force which will carry me henceforth into the future until I stumble again and find myself floundering in the dirt and mud until I once again find a way to clean myself of my mental waste and return on the path. All that is to say that I'm live on Twitch. All that is to say that I'm very happy to be streaming, and I haven't done reading chats poetry in more than 2 weeks, which is quite the break. And I think that's okay. You know, there was the whole breakdown on stream, and then there was the whole hate raid thing, and then there was the whole getting sick. So those are all reasonable reasons to take a minute to not stream, I think. And Nikki, good morning to you as well, lovely human. And Ray, hello. Chats Poetry Detox. Yeah, I mean, sometimes we have to step away, right? Breaks are not only good, but encouraged when needed. Yeah. And I think definitely having been on a sort of extended break from poetry in general, not having been writing, being back now, it was very helpful in being back now. Things are fresh. And even in the last a couple days ago, I wrote a bunch of poetry. I was very excited because I was done being sick, and I'm like, it's time to create again. It's time to emerge from my cave and present my brain with the world or whatever. And so I've written a bunch of poems in the last few days, and then also uh, come up with some interesting, we'll say art philosophical thoughts on the process of analyzing poetry and sort of maybe a new method which I can employ of reading poems and looking at poems and thinking about them, uh, which is basically using poetry, using analysis as a vessel for creating new work of our own. as a sort of way to like imitate and learn and practice techniques. And I might try to do some of that on stream as I read people's stuff going forward, is occasionally be like, I'm going to write on stream. I've always struggled to write on stream. I think this might be a sort of way to approach that. But yeah, I've been reading a bunch, reading poems and then like using them as inspiration and imitating things about them. So that's cool. Hey, can't stay for long, Sir Man Squid, but I did have a question I've been obsessing over lately. We love obsessing, and questions that we obsess over. Um, I think a question that like keeps us up at night or can't escape our head is a very important one. Does a poem need to have a meaning? Um, so I think there are two ways immediately that it goes into my head to approach a question like this, because meaning happens in two different places in a poem. One is as a reader, and one is as a writer, right? When I read a poem, I can read it and think about the meaning that is in the words, or I can choose not to. And when I write a poem, I can also think about a poem like that's trying to convey a meaning, or, right, I can just like not. I can just write words. And, I'm certainly not one to sort of ascribe um, my 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 cutting mat that sits on my table is warped. Sorry, that's the brain that gets distracted by simple material things around me. Um, what was I saying? Okay, so I'm not one to like say how someone should read or write a poem. I think the best part of art is we can approach it however we want in our own way as unique observers and creators, right? So, when you when you go sit down to write a poem, if you just like put a bunch of words down and there's like no thought to it, that doesn't make it less of a less of a poem than something that is agonized. And you say, I have this specific message, this meaning in my head that I want to convey to the world, right? Each of those two are valid, and each are satisfying and useful and powerful in their own way. As a reader, I think it is also okay to sort of ignore meaning entirely. We can read poems simply for the joy of the sound and mouthfeel of the words, right? Some poems are just so incredibly constructed linguistically that it doesn't even matter what's in them in terms of the meaning. We can just read them entirely as a piece of a sort of a linguistic dance. And then also, sometimes we read something and it's a poem about like a topic and a meaning and a point that's very near and dear to our hearts, and then the meaning is inescapable, right? So, I think almost always, maybe always, the answer to these questions, like, does a poem need to have, does a poem require this quality? Does a poem, is a poem defined by this? I think the answer is almost always no. That there's an incredible amount of flexibility in art in the way that we express. And, you know, there are not wrong answers. There is only the right answer of the act of creation, right? However that may sort of come to be. I hope that answers your question. A poet friend once had a year detox of poetry because he got tired of it from a poetry contest he wrote for. Yeah, and especially when we have like those big goals, I think oftentimes goals have this rebound of like you get to the end of the goal and you're like, I feel lost and liminal and, untethered from reality. After I taught my poetry workshop, I guess like a month and change ago, I've been like lost for the last month and change because I just got to that goal and worked very hard toward it, and then it just left me kind of out in the ether. So that makes sense, right? After doing the Poets of Twitch, the zine, 2 years ago, a year and change ago, a year and change ago. I stopped streaming for like 6 months because it just left me in a place where I couldn't do it, right? So it makes sense. That's really helpful. I've been meaning to read Why Poetry by Matthew Zapruder. I think I've heard that title, which gets at the question of meaning. Yeah, I mean, these they're hard questions to answer, like how we approach meaning and how we approach all these different things in poetry. Um, but I think those things can be interesting. I personally find it more valuable to uncover those things through like the act of personal discovery, I guess. um, by that I mean learning through writing and reading of poetry and I guess teaching of it on stream. Pretty much everything I know about poetry has come from just the experience of talking about it online, writing it, and reading it. And it's a very fulfilling way, I think, to learn things and to understand things is through that like intuitive, active mode. Um, and it makes figuring something out really, really satisfying because you're like, wow, I found this, right? Rather than like I read it in a book. And I think like there's this question of if anything can be taught or if we can only sort of point people in the right direction and then people have to come to their own conclusions. I'm kind of partial to that um, frame of thought that like teaching is impossible. You can only kind of teach yourself, um, and the teacher acts as a sort of signpost and a role model. Um, but still a little congested from being sick. Um, yeah, so I figured stuff out recently about poetry. I figured out this incredibly fulfilling process of imitating work, of analyzing something to understand what it's doing with the purpose of trying to imitate one or more things that the poem is doing. Um, it's a really fun process because it combines, right? It unifies um, the analytic and the creative mode, right? It's generative and it's analytic. You both get to like look at a piece and break it down and try to understand it and then implement that as a practice. So you're improving like both of like kind of the main ways of poetry, of reading, of thought. And that's really cool. So maybe I'll end up doing that on stream with like the chat poems that I analyze. I'm not sure. um and I don't know who we're gonna read today because I'm obviously streaming exactly at noon Pacific time, um, which means many people aren't here yet, um, and I don't know what that means in terms of whose poem I'm reading or whatever. But maybe we'll just yap about poetry for a little longer, and if you know Ishmael shows up because we got interrupted in the middle of his poem last time, or if someone else who's had a submission in for a while pulls up, that would be cool. I'm rereading Johannes Pfeiffer's poetry, Toward the Understanding of the Poetic. Also recognize that title. Maybe it's from you, maybe it's from someone else. And it is impressive how it starts from verbal configuration of the police, I wonder if that's autocorrect, rhythm and melody, image and metaphor, and then moves to mood and style. The authentic and inauthentic, the original and the non-original, the embodied and the merely spoken. Lots of big words there. But it's interesting because I have kind of noticed this progression within reading poetry, within analyzing, within thinking is, yeah, poetry. um, the poetic rhythm, the melody, the image. And I think, poetry exists on a number of levels. And the first one is like maybe the surface level um, techniques and tools being used. So, like, the easiest thing to notice in a poem is maybe like that it rhymes in this way or that this alliteration is occurring. And that's like the surface. And then below that is maybe the actual meaning behind the words, what it is saying, what is like the point, right? Or what is being conveyed, and maybe that exists, maybe that doesn't, as we've already discussed. But then like on another level is like tone, right? Mood, um, like the feeling behind it. Like at the very core is some like artistic essence, purpose, um, you know, uh, I almost think art probably like there's a little sliver of a soul at the like not like literally I don't think souls, but like soul in the capacity of like the essence of a piece of art, that encompassing feeling that sort of transcends words. um, and I think poetry exists. Any piece of art exists sort of nested this way as form and substance, as technique, as tool, and then as sort of message and meaning, and then feeling and mood and tone, and then like that thing, that core. Um, and I think that's a really useful framework for like looking at art, analyzing it, thinking about it. It seems more useful than my old framework of sound, meaning, and structure. I think that one is maybe a little bit. Uh, it was useful when I first came up with it. The idea that everything on the page can be divided into the sound of the words, the meaning of the words, and the structure in which they're laid out. But it leaves out everything that doesn't occur within the page, sort of the artistic experience. And I think then that's where we move to this other framework that involves feeling and tone and mood, right? So that's sort of where my head's at lately regarding poetry and analysis, and like how it is arranged as a thing, how we can start to understand it, and how we can approach it as a reader, which is cool. Um, it's only taken like hundreds of hours of reading people's poetry to get to a point where I can maybe say what's going on. And even then, I feel very blind as I read things. Like there's still so much more to know. But that makes sense, right? To truly understand that something takes thousands and thousands of hours. I mean, you have the sort of silly benchmark 10,000 hour rule or whatever that some guy came up with. I don't know if that's Malcolm Gladwell or that's someone else, but um, yeah. Hopefully, um, this is the extent of how bad my congestion and throat is for this stream, because I'd rather not have it be worse. Um, I think it was reading Borges, recounting his childhood experience of reading books and noticing that certain syllables next to each other made funny sounds. And then he says, I had discovered literature. Yeah, it's almost like the door. It's like the opening. The first thing you see is like, oh, like words next to each other in certain ways can like do novel things, right? I think that's one way that we get into the idea of the craft. I think another thing maybe for a lot of people is just stories, and the way that a story, and the way, and like noticing that some people are better at telling stories than others, and that when stories are told in certain ways, um, the um, uh, when stories are told in certain ways, they evoke more feeling, right? I think the noticing funny sounds next to each other is like the beginning of the analytic impulse, And then the noticing that words can make you cry is like the beginning of like the emotional literary impulse. How's your throat been? You got sick and punched there around the same time. Yes. And the 1-2 punch of the punch in the throat and the getting sick um, was really miserable. And I'd say the sickness is mostly gone. And my throat feels good, and I've been playing saxophone and stuff. Um, but from the show, when I got hit in the throat, I still feel like something is maybe like bruised inside of my throat. Like I can't um, do falsetto without it hurting. So I was playing piano the other day and singing, right? And singing up a scale, which I won't do right here for y'all's sake. Um, but when I go into falsetto, oh, I feel like actual factual pain in my throat. Um, and it's not like the sore throat pain. It's like the like something is hurting here. What show did I get hit at? I was at Law Dispute is the band. They are a group from Grand Rapids, Michigan. They play post-hardcore music, which is deeply influenced by spoken word, and a lot of his singing is very just like shouted spoken word with like badass instrumentals behind it. Super cool band. Highly recommend to like anyone who likes poetry and likes harder music. And it's sort of like maybe a foot in the door into hardcore music for those who don't really like enjoy scream and like screamo stuff that's just really like, I don't totally like that stuff either. But it scratches that hardcore impulse while still having like really strong legible lyrics because it's just like shouted words. But I was in the pit, I was moshing, and there were like these three of us, and we were going like super hard. And there were like a few other people who would come into the pit when the songs ramped up, but it was mostly the three of us who were kind of holding it down, moshing. Um, and I definitely just like moshed harder than I have before. Um, and like I mean, I was moshing to the extent that I like almost passed out, um, because it's just a very taxing thing to do. Uh, I did bail from the pit. The almost passing out was around the point of getting hit in the neck. So you know, um, uh, that right. I love them. On my list to see. I'm going to Hellfest in Jersey. That's super cool, Reese. Um, yeah, they're amazing and they're really really good live. I mean, like what the band's been together for at least 20 years, so they're just extremely good performers and polished and uh, yeah, it's just good. I mean, festivals are always like I think worse in terms of sound and all of that, but hopefully they're good. Um, yeah, yeah, that. um, so I want to read poetry on this stream because that's what we do here. Um, and it might be that we're reading a Ray a a Ray translation. I think that might be what we do if if you're fine with that, Ray. You've never been into the pit. Shit's scary. Shit is scarier from the outside than it is from the inside, I would say. And it does depend on the pit. Like there are pits that are just straight up dangerous. Um, but like most people in the pit are extremely kind, and I noticed that with the Law Dispute pit particularly is like it's always the case with a lot of pits. It's always the case that like someone falls, and like everyone stops, and it's like pulling this person back to their feet, making sure they're okay. Like it's not just. I mean, it's absolute chaos for sure, but it's like chaos, but everyone cares for each other. Yeah. Um, and man, the feeling of falling and then like six hands reaching down and just wrenching you back to your feet and you just keep going is a pretty awesome feeling, right? It's like, yeah, it's cool. Okay. The Melina poem. Yeah. So I think it's oh wait. I see First Flower by Serrano and there's Anguita. Um but maybe you have an older one that is the Melina poem. I wouldn't be surprised. um let's see. Is it like way old? Or is someone like tripping? Oh wait. Hmm. What's up? Hope you're well. Good luck on stream. Thank you, EJ. Yeah. I am well, except for my throat being punched in right now. Or got punched in last week. Uh I think Serrano one is the oldest. Okay, so we'll just do that one if that's okay. Um The First Flower from The Impossible Flower by Miguel Serrano. I'm not gonna roll the R because I don't. It's just. Oh, is this a prose poem? Yo, that's cool. I haven't read a prose poem in like actually a long time. Or a vignette, microfiction. This is interesting. um, always, always a different experience to read a translation on stream. Still one that I think I'm like figuring out how to approach as from like a ethical philosophical discussion perspective from all the perspectives really. Reading translation is very different than reading original work. I mean, translation sort of is original work, like that distinction is slightly, we'll say, uh, inaccurate, but yeah. And I'm gonna get it set up. Insert a picture. It's gonna be the poem. Yeah. And Ray, as we read this, I mean, you know the sort of general question, is there any things you would like me to focus on, think about, delve into in particular, that kind of thing? Also, I had others of yours for translating. I had others of yours for translating. I did that one because I was super deprived. Do you mean like you're going to translate more of my poems or you've translated more of my poems? If so, that's super cool. And I thought it was very neat to see my poem translated by you. Um, yeah. Yes. Okay, that's sick. um, okay. But we are reading for now. So, Ray, would you say that this is prose poetry? I mean, I guess I can come to my own definition, and the definitions sort of are arbitrary when you exist between this space of prose and flash fiction and vignette and poetry, right? But this is prose poetry, you say. Sounds good. Um, let's read it. Let's talk about it. Let's see how it is. The First Flower by Miguel Serrano, translated by Ray. Serrano wrote it in England around the 70s. Gotcha. A little bit of background. Next to the house, there was a garden. My first playmates were the roots, the leaves, and those spirits of nature who speak to children. One day, from inside a flower, a hand emerged and beckoned me to come closer. A child is not frightened by such things. It did not surprise me, therefore, to see the hand. What troubled me instead was that the invitation was to enter the flower. Shortly afterward, the flower shed its petals. I wanted to gather them and rebuild it, but it was impossible. Then I thought of making a paper flower, painting it in bright colors. I spent many days at my task until the flower was finished. I took it to the garden and placed it where the hand had appeared. If the flower had been well made, the hand would have emerged again. But the hand did not come. It never returned. My flower could not compare with those in the garden, painted by the good God. At that moment, I ceased to be a child and could no longer converse with the plants, the roots, the spirits, nor with the hands that appear and disappear in gardens. I had entered into competition with nature and with the good God. Without knowing it, I had assumed the mortal commitment of creating a flower. The First Flower by Miguel Serrano. Beautiful. It makes me think of a William Blake quote from the Marriage of Heaven and Hell, from the Proverbs within that. Because I mention this all the time on stream because I love these Proverbs. And that, let me see if I can find it. Well, it's like the labor, like to make a little flower is the labor of ages or something like that. To create a little flower is the labor of ages, William Blake. This idea of man as some creature that tries to create beauty that exists on the level of the sublime, that exists on the level of nature, and maybe, in a lifetime, if you're optimistic, if you're William Blake, you manage to do something like that, create something as beautiful as a flower. If you're Serrano, maybe your outlook is that it's more futile, right? Competition with nature, with God, as he says, and, death in a way, right? Cease to be a child, could no longer converse with the plants. That's a sort of death. But very beautiful way to discuss art, right? What I've been writing about this poem goes about that story by Borjas and Huidobro, view of poetry. Like I had assumed the mortal commitment of creating a flower. Huidobro sees it as creating God, and Serrano is more of a pessimist. Yeah. Hi, Jenny/Imogen. Hello, Maytari. Yeah. Some think, right, that it's possible that you can create God, and some think that maybe art is this competition against the idea of the ideal, this grappling with the notion of perfection and the inability to capture what is. I think I love these kinds of ways of thinking because I often think this way about art. And we're going to read it again. And then, earlier, a moment ago when we were talking, we were discussing this sort of layering of things, of levels at which we can look at a poem. That we can look at a poem at the level of technique, right, and the things on the page. And then we can look at it on the level of meaning, which we've already started to talk about, because I think this is a very like meaning heavy work. And we can look at it on the level of like tone, mood, feeling, and then maybe there is some like soul, and that is the act of grappling with the truth of the poem, right? And as an experiment for myself, since this is a framework I've only recently concocted as of like a couple of days ago, I might try to read the poem, analyze the poem following this sort of path, and see how that goes. Which means we'll start with talking about technique, right? The prosody, the prose nature of this poem, the structure of, some of these things where it kind of loops back at the end to the beginning, um, some of the other tools being used, right? And then we'll talk about this whole flower creating God thing, right? And then the tone, maybe words like innocence and death, and some of those words that I started to use, and then the soul. And then maybe I will try to write something that imitates one or more of these aspects, because I think it's a useful exercise, and I want to try doing it on stream. So that might be the sort of outline of of the next couple hours. Is I'd imagine how long that will all take if I do it. But first, I've got to read it again. The first flower. And maybe we'll also talk about the Spanish version, I'm not sure. The first flower. I don't think we need to talk about the Spanish version, though. Mostly because I'm not a very knowledgeable translator. The first flower. Next to the house there was a garden. My first playmates were the roots, the leaves, and those spirits of nature who speak to children. And we'll maybe start underlining things. One day, from inside a flower, a hand emerged and beckoned me to come closer. A child is not frightened by such things. It did not surprise me, therefore, to see the hand. What troubled me instead was that the invitation was to enter the flower. Shortly afterward, the flower shed its petals. I wanted to gather them and rebuild it, but it was impossible. I then thought of making a paper flower, painting it in bright colors. I spent many days at my task until the flower was finished. I took it to the garden and placed it where the hand had appeared. If the flower had been well made, the hand would have emerged again, but the hand did not come. It never returned. My flower could not compare with those in the garden, painted by the good God. At that moment, I ceased to be a child, and could no longer converse with the plants, the roots, the spirits, nor with the hands that appear and disappear inside the garden, disappear in gardens. I had entered into competition with nature and with the good God. Without knowing it, I had assumed the mortal commitment of creating a flower. So, I think one of the most notable techniques that sticks out to me in this poem, which I already mentioned as soon as I was like, whoa, is this a prose poem? Is the fact that it's a prose poem. And prose poetry is criminally uncommon, I would say, maybe, in terms of the overall amount of it that we see in poetic spaces that we read, that I get sent on stream, right? I think of, like the 150 or so poems that I've read on stream. Like maybe 1 in 50 are ever like a prose poem. Maybe like 1 in 30 have prosaic qualities, you know? Maybe that actually probably feels about right, right? Like prose poetry, yeah, really, I would say so. I think maybe like one in, I would say in terms of like a real like prose poem, it's like that 1 in 50. Like people don't write them that much. I would think maybe like prosaic qualities, you maybe see it in like 1 in 10 is more accurate. But I guess then that's a pretty like vague, blurred line of like what counts as like something being prosaic within a poem, and it's sort of a useless distinction. But I think something that really just occupies this mode of like this feels like I'm being told a story, right? Um, is the feeling that that technique is giving me here, right? And prose poetry often accomplishes that, right? Because prose is the way that we tell stories. It's the way that it's closer sometimes to the way we speak. Although this is actually an interesting thought, right? Um, uh, whether poetry or prose or something else is closer to the way we actually talk in conversation. I mean, ideally, maybe the, like in truth, like prose is not the way we speak, right? And maybe dialogue is, attempting to be a representation of the way we speak. But even then, maybe that falls short in some ways and doesn't really capture how speech and thought and conversation happens, right? Um, but prose is how we tell stories. I think is a good definition, right? It's the kind of writing that we have in novels, excluding the dialogue. I mean, does dialogue exist within prose? I don't know. Is dialogue separate than prose? Probably. They're very distinctly different, so we can at least say that. Um, so what's interesting? Oh, that's curious. Is we have quotation marks uh, at the beginning of these, right? As if this is being written as literally telling a story. And I think that's, maybe how it's supposed to feel. Um to green. Right? That we're like discussing something that happened in childhood, that we're recalling an event, and it is this almost, it has this feeling of maybe a cautionary tale or something you would tell to someone, or like, like this like fairy tale in a way, that it has this like flower that we go into. um it feels somewhere in that like folk story kind of space. um and I think the prose, right, is contributing to that feeling. And I think also these quotation marks, right, when we use quotation marks, we are literally suggesting that this is being spoken by somebody, right? That's what they're for grammatically. They tell us this is coming out of a person's mouth. And it's a very subtle thing, right? We could present this whole poem, this whole prose poem, as the exact same but without the quotation marks. And the text would probably like feel roughly the same. But at the same time, right, this subtle signal of the quotation marks is maybe another piece of like textual evidence or another piece of backup that says like, yeah, this is being told to me by someone, right? I think it was Plato who goes about literary genres as whose voice work in each one. Like in theater, the characters speak. In poetry, the poet talks. And the third one, I can't remember, but it would be oratory or mixed genres. The world speaks. Interesting. Yeah, that's a way to put it. And I don't know if I necessarily agree with Plato. I mean, maybe theater extends to prose, right? Storytelling, the characters speak, any kind of. But I mean, then like storytelling is a very difficult word because like poetry is storytelling sometimes, and it's a whole thing, right? It's very fuzzy lines no matter what. Um, but yeah, I think this is like one of the major techniques happening is this feeling of being told, right? And that's cool. I think people already gravitate to verse more in Poetry Matters and then free verse. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty even split of what people send me of like verse versus free verse. And then prose poetry like this is like a very small minority. I think concrete poetry is pretty rare in terms of what people send to stream. Um, yeah, not many concrete poems. What messes are we getting into in this world of literature, huh? Right, yeah. Better to keep that for another time and another thought. um, since we are discussing this poem, right? So, other things, right, that give us this feeling of being told a story. And, you know, this is where these sort of levels of things within the poem start to blur together because techniques, right, this is like the quotation marks, this is like the prose, um, this is like the use of first person, which is the next one I'm going to talk about. Sure, these are just technical things, but they also imply things like tone and feeling and mood, right? And in a way, they help support the meaning because, right, what I said is like, oh, the prose and the quotation in the first person makes this feel like I'm being told the story. So it's this motion from the concrete to the abstract, or I guess maybe this is the abstract from the on the page to the emotional to the feeling. Um, but another thing that gives us this feeling of a story that I really enjoy. Next to the house there was a garden. My first playmates were the roots, the leaves, and those spirits of nature who speak to children. Right? My, me. We're in the first person, so it adds onto like the layers of this is me, the poet, telling a story about my own life. I am reading something that like someone is telling me. And if I were me, Imogen, to tell a story, let's say about the punk show where I got punched in the neck on accident, it would be, uh, so I was at this show. The band that was playing was Law Dispute, right? And they came on stage, and originally I was just gonna hang out on the side and not do anything, right? And then I decided that I was going to go into the pit, and then we were moshing. We is the collective of people in the mosh pit, right? So yeah, a personal admission, right? It would be very strange for me to tell a story and say, so Imogen was at a punk show. And Imogen was standing off to the side and then looked at the pit and saw how fun it was and decided that right, this doesn't make so much sense. It doesn't like convey this feeling of like someone in front of you telling a story about themselves. I mean, it is someone telling a story. It's just about someone else. So, as you say, right, a personal admission. It also brings us this sort of like intimacy of the personal, right? We have this intimacy, we have this story, it is personal. These are some of like the feelings that we're starting to give off. Or second person, yeah, you went into the pit and you did this thing. And I think second person is a very difficult. Second person might be the most difficult. Uh, what do you call? Is it perspective? There's a word for these first, second, third person. Second person might be the most difficult one to pull off in poetry, right? To say like you throughout a poem referring to the reader. Because I think oftentimes using the second person has this feeling of being a little bit like preachy sometimes, where people will like write their personal poem and then like address the audience. And there's nothing bad with it. I just think sometimes like this is a feeling that I've heard people um, observe about poetry, and I've observed it myself. Um, and if you're trying to avoid that, it's very difficult. It's very ego like, right? It's like, yeah, you the reader. You should feel these things. You should think about this, you know? So when you go about your day, here's the moral of my story, you know? And maybe if it's not used in that way, it doesn't feel so ego. So I'm explaining this to you. But anyway, we're using the first person, and the point is that like again, these techniques have many different things that they can um, convey within work, and they can help support everything else kind of happening. I feel like technique is a word that I don't really like um, because I think when we talk about techniques, we think of like literary devices or poetic devices, right? Things like rhyme, alliteration, whatever. But maybe a better phrase is just whatever is on the page, what's actually there. Because there are things happening on pages sometimes that we don't necessarily classify as like our regular suite of poetic techniques. Uh, for example, the other day I was reading a poem by this guy named W.S. DiPiero because I'm stalking his work because I want to go study with him at Stanford in his workshop, well, in Stanford's workshop. Um, and I was reading his work, right? And I noticed that, like, every time he uses a verb, his verbs are just very strong. They're very energetic. And I think if you asked a poet for like a list of literary devices, they wouldn't necessarily jump to like verbs because that's just like a part of speech, right? But I'm like, he says like ice works canal the pavements, power lines down, cars pillowed, helpless in the snow, bus fumes vulcanize the twilight's 911 sirens, right? So like every one of those verbs, very strong, very active, conveying very specific things. Um, so like, technique, literary techniques or poetic devices isn't always like maybe the best word we can use, right? Um, or, for example, in another one of his poems called Psychopomp, he does this thing where he shifts, actually, from using he to using you. He shifts from the third to second person within the poem to switch from talking about someone to talking to that person. And that's not like something that would jump to mind as poetic device, but it is definitely a thing happening on the page. So maybe this is something I've been thinking about, like moving away from the idea of literary devices, poetic devices, right? Because they're like, you just end up with all these like intimidating vocabulary words. And I think something like the mouthfeel of these words here can be like way more precise than like talking about a device. How do I send poetry to you? I haven't asked. Reese, you do so by joining the Discord, and then you send it in the Discord. Um, and the Discord no longer has links that you can just publicly click on in the bio of YouTube or Twitch because we got like hate rated by transphobic people. Um, so basically, usually like someone else just has to send it in chat, like send an invite to the server, which I can't exactly do while I'm live, at least maybe in the middle of the poem. But I can do it later if you remind me, if you're still around, or on a future stream. But it's annoying. I have to sort out a a way to go about that. Oh, awesome, Maytari, thank you. And I think I enabled that people can invite others to the server. I think I disabled it for a second after the hate raid. If it's off, then we'll sort it out later. Reclusive Vulcanize goes hard in that poem. Yeah, Vulcanize does. Um, and sorry to hear I got the hate raid. Yeah, it happens. It's pretty fucked up, but like, can't let it get to me too much. That's just hurt people. Um, very clearly expressing their vulnerability. Um, Back to what you were saying earlier, like those stand-up comedy shows where they talk down to you. Yeah, yeah, like it works. It works very well in some cases and can be very effective, and it's just a matter of how it's used. so, so in this case, though, in this poem, uh, the first person is very effective for what it's communicating, as this is a story being told to us, right? Um, Sort of, maybe also in the mm, storytelling mode, potentially, is something else that I notice happening in this poem, which is kind of cool, is that it circles back from like beginning to end, right? We have next to the house, there was a garden. My first playmates were the roots, the leaves, and those spirits of nature who speak to children. One day, from inside a flower, a hand emerged and beckoned me to come closer. Right? Ending. And we have this like nice structural stanzaic separation. At that moment, I ceased to be a child and could no longer converse with the plants, the roots, the spirits, nor with the hands that appear and disappear in gardens. Right? So it brings us back, and this like signals to us really nicely that thing that we've like come to a conclusion. And this happens in lots of forms of media, right? We can think of I mean right now I've been listening to and playing a lot of jazz. So this is just something I think about often right now. But in jazz, usually the um, beginning is like the head, the start of the tune, the initial like melody. So in I don't know, "Fly Me to the Moon," Frank Sinatra, right? The actual right. That's like the head, the main melody, and then we like go into usually an extended solo section where we're like improvising, where we're changing things, where we're doing other stuff, where we're developing, right? Development. And then at the end, we return to the head again, often, to close out the piece. And it tells us, like, we're done, you know? It's over. We've returned. And then the song ends, right? And this happens often in poetry. This happens in music. This happens, sometimes even in novels where you get the extent of these big, like, full circle conclusions unifying the beginning and end. It's not always something that happens, but I think often, right, especially in like a story, it's a very satisfying conclusion. So we have this sort of structure of what's on the page, um, of this opening, this development, and then this return, this cycle, and I think that maybe contributes to this maybe like fairy tale, folk tale, cautionary tale, like learning the lesson, moral that connects to the beginning, um, this like child to adult, adult to child, like kind of thing happening in the work, right? Um, and that's pretty cool. Links not sending in YouTube, it definitely could be um like YouTube blocking links or something. That's very possible. Which is annoying. So I mean, like, there used to be a bot command in Twitch, and then my bot broke a while ago, and I just didn't fix it. So, but that also doesn't help on YouTube. Uh, so there's that. Um, anyway, anyway. I remember a friend once made a poem with only rare or never used words, and he made something like Vatican of the Wagnerian xylophone. That's super cool. Um, this poem has very simple language, right? Another thing happening on the page, we can talk about maybe the complexity or the simplicity of the language itself. And in this case, we have very simple language. And, I don't know about the Spanish. I mean, a lot of these words look pretty like simple and straightforward. Like I can kind of read this as like a bad Spanish speaker. um, and we're talking about very simple things, right? We're talking about like flowers and hands, and we're talking about, oh, a flower, but it's paper, and like painting, and like, you know, maybe the most difficult word that we have in this poem is like this notion of like in competition with nature, but even that is very simple, right? um and again, when we're talking about a story about childhood, maybe told to a child, or just occupying this space of this tonal space of innocence, of a storytelling, of something personal, right? I think that's a very powerful tool that's subtle, because like the subtlety is really that we are not doing something, right? We are not using the tool of complexity, right? Complexity is a tool. We can always add more complexity and more interesting things going on and like ramp up what is happening within a work, right? But at a basic level, when we have simplicity, it's almost like we're not actively doing something. Because like everyone who learns language starts by speaking simply. And then complexity is something we layer and add on and add on and add on. But it feels unique because oftentimes we read poetry and we use complex language. We use interesting words like Di Piero, using vulcanize as a verb to really give this like strong feeling, this very forward kind of language. But sometimes relaxing back into a simpler mode can be like a really valuable thing to do. Very simple in Spanish too. Awesome. And I think then your translation has captured that very well. So good on you for that. uh, Far more charitable response regarding the hate raid. Yeah. Um, uh, Being a piece of shit doesn't justify that kind of behavior. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't justify it, but it's like the reality is like it doesn't hurt me as much knowing that when someone is hurting me, it's because they're a piece of shit, you know? The main thing I'm trying to work toward in my writing is simplicity. Very hard skill, I think. Simplicity can be technicality and complexity though. Yeah, like in this case, simplicity is adding another layer, right? Simplicity is adding to the suite of valuable and interesting things this poem is doing. So in that capacity, right, it is sort of a technique, something that adds technicality to this work. Um, but it is also like the absence of adding. It's the absence of maximalism, right? Maybe. And maybe that's a wholly like wrong way to discuss it, right? Like maybe there is some natural, and then there is like maximalist over here, and then there's some other technique called minimalism over here, right? Um, but you know, I'm not sure if that's like loaded. Like, is a haiku employing the technique of minimalism? And then there's this whole genre of music called minimalism, which really I think is quite maximalist in a lot of ways. So, you know, these things end up very hard to define. Um, Also, did you know Serrano is the only guy Jung wrote a prologue for? Interesting. Jung is a pretty big deal in the the world of art and literature and the creation of beautiful things. I did not know that, Ray. That's fascinating. Yeah, I just have a bad habit of being complex. At times, not deliberately, but often complex for the sake of complex. Complexity, I think, can water down instances of beauty where simplicity thrives, but this is all contextual. Yes, very contextual. Um, and there are ways that we can have poems that are simple in some ways and complex in other ways, right? This poem, for all of its simple presentation of what is on the page, I would say when we start to talk about meaning and what this poem is talking about, and really that this poem is a discussion of like what it means to be an artist and what it means to uh like grapple with the notion of perfection, and to lose one's innocence as a child, right? This poem is extremely complex on the level of meaning and message, but I mean, that's probably a very complex message. It's deeply philosophical, it's deeply profound, right? But extremely simple in terms of language. Um, because I was reading Di Piero yesterday, he's on my mind. Um, but he writes very complex language to describe very simple things. Um, then there's this poem called Cheap Gold Flats, um, where he's describing like the interior of a bar at the beginning, and this is how he describes it. The bartender, tossing cans, carton to cooler, hand to hand with silky mortal ease, while the 4 p.m. beer and shot standees study the voiceless TV above our heads. The worst and longest storm on record. Iceworks canal the pavements, power lines down, cars pillowed helpless in the snow, bus fumes vulcanize the twilight's 911 sirens. Enter Hotspur, enter, with alarums, enter Hazel, touching my elbow at the bar. My staticky daily news breaks in the draft, right? So we're talking about like the inside of a bar, but we're using these crazy words, uh, Iceworks, Vulcanize, Alarums, Mortal Ease, right? So contrast, or contrasting, right, the different parts of our simplicity, our complexity, be very valuable. I got told you're writing sins of snobbery. That's a great, it's a great insult, honestly. Now here I think I've been separating complex simple at the level of syntax versus level of semantics, but that was mistaken. The two are tied together. The simplicity I find most beautiful is that which conveys the most complex ideas as the most obvious and clear way. I mean, yeah, that is, maybe to bring it back to the poem, that is the notion of creating a little flower, right? um, the notion of using all of our human uh, capacity, um, to grapple at something as simple that nature does naturally, of like the beauty of a little flower, right? Um, so I agree that that is probably, I mean, I think that pursuit alone is enough to carry an artist through a lifetime of creation. Now, I say that as a 22-year-old, but when I think about the idea of creating a flower with my writing, um, like it just, it seems to me something that will take lifetimes, you know. Um, and if that's what you set your sights on, that's good, but also be patient, right? I'm in a poetry deathmatch with God, and holy shit, dude has hands. Yeah, dude has hands, and little flowers. um, yeah. This poem also has some very like whimsical instances of like sound of alliteration. I underlined some of them, right? The leaves and those spirits of nature who speak to children. That line, this sentence has a very like song-like quality to it, I think. Um, Let me not do that color though. We'll keep it in green. My first playmates were the roots, the leaves, and those spirits of nature who speak to children. Right, we have alliteration of leaves, those, spirits, speak. And spirits has this like, you know, front alliteration of spa, but we also have like sa. So we have these like two subtly different alliterative things, roots, um, and even roots and spirits, right? There's like playmates. So there's like a few different levels of like S alliteration happening within a line like this. And it gives it a nice little lift of like whimsy, I think. Something like come closer, something like I spent many days at my task until the flower was finished, right? Pretty. Could almost be in like a little fairy tale book, you know. And he spent days at the task until the flower was finished. It's very nice. It's very light. It's very like whimsical. Um, and I like that a lot, right? I wonder, I don't know how it is in the Spanish, right? But as a translator, Ray, I think it's an interesting thought of like, I think one could lean into that, or one could decide to lean out of that. There's probably a way to retell this story, to translate this story that uses a lot more of these little whimsical alliterative things, little rhymes here and there, just within the prose, to give it that like picture book fairy tale feeling. Um, and I don't know how it is in the Spanish. Um, and I think, that's where, as a translator, my thought is, you take this work and do that sort of process of trying to understand all these things and what they're doing, and you then go try to be faithful. Or you say, I think Serrano should have made this more alliterative, and that would be cool. So, you know. From what I've read about this whole book, not only this poem, everyone talks about Serrano's prose and how it's very lullaby and fairy tale like. Well, there you go. Um, and it would be interesting, right, to lean into that. I know Spanish like often ends up with a lot of like incidental um, rhyme, just because of like the similarity of verb conjugations and that kind of stuff, and the more limited like number of vowel sounds. Maybe I'll like read some of this. I don't know. Um, Junto a la casa había un jardín. Junto a la casa había un jardín. Mis primeros compañeros, right? Primeros compañeros, right? That has a really nice bounce between those two words. Mis meros compañeros de juego fueron we, right? Fuego fueron las raíces, las hojas y esos espíritus. Espíritus. Esos espíritus, right? De la naturaleza que hablan a los niños, right? So we do this in the Spanish. Primeros compañeros. Un día del interior de una flor. Interior de una flor. Right? We do it again. I don't know what color I'm supposed to be using. I think I was using red for this stuff. Asomó a mano y me hizo. Una mano y me hizo, right? Señas para que me aproximase. Aproximase. Un niño no se asusta de eso. No me extraño. Pues ver la mano. Pues ver la mano. See, I'm bad at reading in Spanish, but I'm mostly just reading the words. But yeah, we get some of this stuff, right? We get this song like, so I think it would maybe be fun to lean more into that in the translation if you were to take another pass. I think what you've done here already with that works, right? And maybe see how far you can push it, I think is interesting, right? I'm not religious, but even if I assume the existence of a God, I think there is something about art which requires humanness, the fragility, the gaps in knowledge. The very idea of God creating art or poetry feels contradictory to me. Yeah, I mean, I think, Reclusi, to me, going on that thought, God and art exist in the same space. Um, because, at least in my conception of things, art is something that looks toward the ideal. It looks to like take the world and like bring it into this idealized form in whatever way, because it's taking reality and abstracting it. And God is like a fundamental abstraction, like divinity, right? Is like the abstraction of the essence of all things. And art looks to make God of reality through man, sort of, right? Oh yeah, fully agree. Yeah, art is often an attempt of transcending our nature. Yeah. Um, and I think sometimes it does, right? How's it going? Yiji's taking a quick break, so I thought I'd pop in. I think it's going great because we're talking about philosophy and art, or often as an attempt at reducing our nature to less than we are. Weird dichotomy. Yeah, Nikki, we're talking about some of these philosophic ideas, as well as talking about fairy tales and or lullabies. um, yeah, reducing our nature to less than we are. Fundamentally, it's about taking reality and like breaking the shackles of it, right? Um, and I mean that, right? Imagination. It's the realization of the human impulse to or the natural human process of imagining, of taking reality and then, you know, eh, you know, spinning a version of it that is less real or more real than reality, right? um, and I think, right, maybe this is continuing to fall in line with our sort of, um, you know, poetic matryoshka here. Um, because within our, you know, sort of techniques on the page, um, here, so we have these little like whimsical things. We have like whimsy in our literary devices. All of these are combining to create this feeling, you know, lullaby, story, a little bit magical, a little bit fairy tale. Of course, even within meaning, right, we have the very like magical realism of like stepping into the flower while I'm telling a story of my childhood. And like magical realism has this like childishness of like um, just accepting magic at face value, right? So anyway, like all of this contributes to that magical idea, and then that makes like all of this contribute to that sort of, we'll say, like lost, idealized innocence, this idea of, you know, God and the ideal and the imagined, right? Um, so this poem, like top to bottom, between like the surface layers and the deeper layers, things are like working in harmony to communicate the same ideas. Um, and that's probably like uh, good, right? It's probably good. Uncarving the joints of reality and cementing them together in different ways, I guess, lol. That's what a beautiful image, you know, carving up reality or uncarving the joints of reality, right? And rearranging it. I feel like one could create a very compelling piece of visual art with that as a prompt, you know, uncarving the joints of reality and cementing them together in different ways. um, that's neat. um, anyway, that's a good start on this poem. We will continue after a short break. Um, in which, and we will read that long message from Ray after the break. During this break, I encourage you to stand up and move because it is very healthy to stop sitting inert. I encourage you to look away from the screen because that's probably good for your mind. And I encourage you to like get some water or have a snack or go to the bathroom. 3 minutes is like so much time to do that. Um, 3 minutes is way more than 180 seconds, is all I'm saying. So we'll be back in just a few minutes. Um, and I hope to see you on the other side. Hello. Welcome back in to the stream thing. Seeing each other on the other side. What kind of cult ending am I part of? Do we get wine at least? I cannot guarantee uh, any beverages. It's bring your own beverage to this cult meeting. Actually, bring your own. What do they call that? That sacraments? I'm not sure. um, bring your own ritual items. I think that's what like weird culty religious people should do. They should have bring your own Kool-Aid. I like that, Callie. As long as it is not the kill yourself kind. Um, I think all the weird cult people should get together, right? They should all get together and they should have like bring your own ritual. And they should all just hang out and each be doing their like weird things. And like this person is like you know like being a Horuspex and like reading the future from the gut of a pig over in that corner, and then like this person over here is like I don't know, mixing up Kool-Aid, and that person is like chanting some weird shit and like summoning a demon, and there's like a salt circle over there. I think that'd be really really fun. um they should do that. BYOB to the other side cult meeting. That feels anti the other side aspect. I suppose that's fair, right? Like to bring the material things, but I guess that's up to your own personal interpretation. It's just if you don't BYOB, you're not gonna have anything to beverage. um, Ray, you said, once while chatting with friends, we got to the topic of art is meant to transcend nature or the mundane aspects of life. To which I replied to my friend with a quote from Gustavo Bueno, of course, dropping a quote, even with your real life friends. The least poetic person in the world, but very true in what he said. If art is meant to give beauty to the world, what are the moon, sunsets, and forests for? Oh, oh, what a see. And I think I've been thinking about this particularly because I've come across this notion, and I've had this notion before that like everything in the world can be seen as beautiful, or like the idea that every person can be loved, right? These are like fairly understandable notions, I think. Although they're not always popular, I think in practice, like it's very hard to love everyone or to see beauty in every moment of a life. Um, but even amongst like horror, we have something like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, right? Where the whole idea is that the beauty of the human is that they can find purpose even in the worst situations. And he was in Auschwitz, right? um, so so there is beauty evident in all things, right? In the moon, the sunsets, in the forests, and in the tragedy of death, and in the longing of a lost lover or whatever, right? There's beauty, and I think art maybe is then to take that sort of reception of all of these signals of beauty from the world, right? And then try to convey to the world my personal brand, our personal brand of, right? Um, Beauty and what that means. Maybe. I don't know. Yeah, to give words to the beauty, Reclusi, right? I think that's an excellent response, right? To share it, to share my beauty with other people. Because when I just experience beauty, it's a personal thing, right? But humans are social. We have this impulse to share, to create community, to take what we have when we really love it and give it to someone else. So it makes sense, right? Like the headhunter in Moby Dick, dude doesn't care. He's a headhunter with a knife. He worries about his pipe. I don't know what that's referring to, and I haven't read Moby Dick, so um, unfortunate reality of having a bunch of literary minded people in chat is like everyone has all these probably very poignant and useful references, um, and there's so much literature that no one knows anything. Nothing can be known. Um, although maybe, I mean, we can argue that I should have read Moby Dick by now or something. Um, but right now I'm reading, I think, another must-read book, at least for Americans. Um, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. Uh, Freaking so good. Holy shit. Modern classic of the American canon, I would say. Um, yeah. I am sick, which proves I'm not a vampire. Dude, I was sick until like yesterday. That's crazy. Maybe it's because I fixed my sleep schedule, so my vampire traits are fading. Maybe, right? I'm also like way older than you. I've had more time to read. Yeah, it's super not fair, right? That I have to suffer the beauty of experiencing the rest of the moments that I have and cannot break free of my temporal shackles. Fuck, man. um, yeah, brutal. We have it hard out here. Your voice is raspy as heck. Yeah, mine was too. Um, I guess the sick is going around. Um, okay, so let's return to this poem, The First Flower, this little flower of a work. I don't know if this work is a little flower. It sort of like describes the problem. I don't know if it is the answer at the same time. That's an interesting notion, though, right? Um, the question of if if this is a beautiful enough capturing of the competition with nature and the good God, um, that it also serves as a victory over it. Um, unsure. But I mean, we've already been yapping about, you know, the meaning and what this work is about. And these things tend to be pretty like inseparable. As we start to talk about the words on the page, we end up, noticing them, I think, because they connect with the meaning and the tone and the soul and the feelings and all of these things, right? Um, so these aren't so like vertical as I might, depict them. Um, but I'm going to read it again and we can talk about what the heck this poem is actually talking about. And maybe we can disagree. And we'll try to keep it to the poem, which is interesting. It's easy to like read something in the poem and then want to have the whole philosophical discussion outside of it. And that's very valuable and it's very fun. Um, that's one of the best parts about art is like the discussions that we get to have that, blossom from the collective interaction of art. That's why art people just love to talk about art with each other, right? Um, uh, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know. The first flower. Next to the house, there was a garden. Even that line, there was. There was a thing. There was a castle. There was a princess. There was a. It's very, very fairy tale. Next to the house, there was a garden. My first playmates were the roots, the leaves, and those spirits of nature who speak to children. One day, from inside a flower, a hand emerged and beckoned me to come closer. A child is not frightened by such things. It did not surprise me, therefore, to see the hand. What troubled me instead was that the invitation was to enter the flower. Shortly afterward, the flower shed its petals. I need to underline something. I need to underline the hand. The hand is a really interesting symbol here. The hand. Why is it a hand, right? I think that's a really great question to talk about is the hand. Anyway, shortly afterward, the flower shed its petals. I wanted to gather them and rebuild it, but it was impossible. Then I thought of making a paper flower, painting it in bright colors. I spent many days at my task until the flower was finished. I took it to the garden and placed it where the hand had appeared. But the flower had been well made. If the flower had been well made, the hand would have emerged again. I think this is like such an important line. But the hand did not come. It never returned. My flower could not compare to those in the garden, painted by the good God. At that moment, I ceased to be a child and could no longer converse with the plants, the roots, the spirits, nor with the hands that appear and disappear in gardens. I had entered into competition with nature and with the good God. Without knowing it, I had assumed the mortal commitment of creating a flower. Fucking banger. Fucking banger. I joined late, but next to the house makes it feel like the garden is not part of the house, but separate from it, which makes it mystical, something greater, or not something the author wanted to attach to the house. Yeah, I think there's a lot of subtle meaning in that, right? Next to the house, there was a garden, right? In the first line, we are creating this very important like meaning, right, as we juxtapose these symbols, house and garden. And I guess let me ask you all, how is a house different from a garden? It's not a trick question. How is a house, what makes a house different from a garden? I think garden is actually also interesting because a garden is also different from nature, right? A garden is different from a flower, right? These things have, very, there's like a symbolic line between these three things. I guess that's what I'm asking someone in chat to maybe come to. For me growing up, my garden was home. So this is where my whole point stems from, funny pun stems from. And what made the garden home more so than the house? Rick Lucy. For you, right? Why was the garden so special, right? I guess is a question that I'm curious to know. Yeah. Anyone else have thoughts on why a house is sort of symbolically different than a garden? Even if you've never had a garden, Callie. I think there's still something that can be understood. House versus garden versus nature itself, or house versus garden versus the individual flower. You planted beans before. That's dope. In like school, maybe? In like a science class, I know they do that a lot. I remember planting beans. And everyone wanted to have the tallest bean. It was like a whole like competition, which is like nice, right? It's a way to get kids interested, is like pit them against each other in combat, right? Rats ate my plant. They really enjoyed my plant. I mean, I guess you contributed to the circle of life. Indoors, parents were fighting. I had a little action figure, lived in an imaginary universe, spent 90% of my time outside when I was young. But I guess I see there's a divide between levels or degrees of naturalness. That's what I was getting at. That's what I was thinking. House, garden, nature, the extent of human intervention. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's interesting. There's the amount of human intervention, but this idea of like parents fighting indoors versus like the garden is, a place that is maybe more harmonious, right? A garden has less conflict. A garden is calm. A garden is safe. We can think of even like going like symbologically, God, Garden of Eden, right? A garden is perfect. in that realm, garden has this ideality. It has that mystical feeling, like you said, right? That the garden had some magic for you, Reclusi. And then we also, parallel to all of this, have this idea that the garden is more natural, right? It is less human, and then the house is human. And the house also has, right, conflict. The house has imperfection. The house, it's interesting because, like, yes, the house is safe, but the house also acts as a way to like repel things. It's sort of like defensive in a way that the garden, it lacks the same like safe harmony, right? So very interesting thing we do, right? When we say next to the house there was a garden, right? We could just say there was a garden, but I think the house implies something really important. um, Serrano was also a great reader and connoisseur of Spanish literature, including Spanish mysticism and the idea that the believer poet meets his beloved God in a garden to love each other in secret. The mystical experience. Serrano was okay, so it also has this like symbological connection within that um, literary, cultural, mystical space. Um, the believer slash the poet meets his beloved in a garden, right? We meet the beloved, we contact God in garden. And the interesting thing about a garden is also not nature, right? Nature is fully like unbound by the human touch. Nature is the flower itself, right? The garden is cultivated at least a little bit, right? The garden has a hand involved, a human hand. Um, and I think that's a different hand than what we're talking about here, right? The hands that appear and disappear in gardens. Um, but I think using a garden is interesting because the garden is a sort of work of art, right? A garden is a place where we take nature and sculpt it into beauty, right? Or not into beauty. Nature is already beautiful, but we sculpt it into something, of man. And then this is a really interesting parallel with the paper flower, right? Art. We take something of man and we hope it can be as beautiful as nature. We take a facsimile and we hope that it lives up to the thing. Um, it's like very, very parallel, very circular. Um, so, house and a garden. I'm so glad that you um, called attention to that line, reclusi, right? Because there's so much depth there, right? Or there can be depth if we go looking for it. Also, he was born in Santiago, and houses there in a big city would usually like be like their gateway to nature, apart from the from something into the countryside. Uh, Travels is probably what that's supposed to be. Travels into the countryside. Okay, yeah. So the garden is this like one respite, this one place where you can like return to nature and I guess commune with that God. Um, I've always found nature very important in the art making process, so it certainly speaks to me. And as someone who like lives in a city, and like parks are often very healing, or going out right into the desert. My nephew came in to show me his Roblox game. What did I miss? um, just me wrapping up by saying that the garden is man placing his hand on nature and trying to shape it, and that's sort of inverse of man taking his creation art, the paper flower, and trying to have it be as beautiful as nature itself. And then also me appreciating your comment about Santiago and relating to it myself as a person who lives in a city. where nature isn't always that common, but parks are very nice. Also, my flower cannot compare to the immediate shift in mentality is quite sad. Full blown loss of that childhood. Favorite part of this whole thing personally. Yeah, it's such a like blowout of a line, you know? Like I took it to the garden, right? We have this beautiful innocence of the child, right? I spent days at my task until the flower was finished. The child before this moment can't imagine, right, that what they're creating like won't be as beautiful, right? Because this is like their first flower, their first attempt at creating art. Um, I took it to the garden and placed it where the hand had appeared. It's like it's reverent almost at this point, right? Taking this labor, this object, this thing that we've worked so hard for, right? And you can imagine the child, their little hands taking this delicate flower, putting it in the garden, and then if the flower had been well made, right? It has again this fairy tale logic, this dream logic that like makes sense, right? I mean, it's important to think about what this hand is. What is the hand emerging, right? When when the flower has been well made, right? That the hand would have emerged again. And then like period, new sentence. But the hand did not come. It never returned. My flower could not compare with those in the garden, right? We have this like three, one, two, three. Hand did not come, never returned. My flower could not compare in the garden. We're doing this repetition. That's maybe back on the level of what's happening on the page. Repetition to like hammer in the pain, right? That is felt in this moment. Painted by the good God. And like what a great use of the specific language, right? Painted by the good God. And we said before, right? The paper flower, painting it in bright colors, right? That's like awesome. So cool. um, yeah. It's tragic. Loss of innocence, childhood, wonder, etc. Yeah. So I want to talk about the hand. The hand fascinates me. One day, from inside a flower, a hand emerged and beckoned me to come closer. A child is not frightened by such things. It did not surprise me. Therefore, to see the hand, What troubled me instead, this is like an interesting line too, was that the invitation was to enter the flower. Right? Like, why is that troubling? I love how there's no explanation provided for that line. What troubled me instead was that the invitation was to enter the flower. Okay, moving on. Shortly afterward, the flower shed its petals. Right? There's almost like, um, you know, this like time skip in a sense. Like, it almost feels like there's something missing here, at least to me. Like what happened? Did he enter the flower? Did he go in? Was there like this whole flower moment? Like, um, it's interesting. Um, and I have a thought. I have a thought. Like, at least my notion of the hand. I mean, I guess I'm curious what other people think, if anyone has an idea of what the hand is, right? Because I have an idea, but probably better to ask you all first, right? Um, MTF or FTM rat season? MTFTX. I originally transitioned male to female, and then now I just sort of have come into like a in the middle agender kind of situation where I don't care. Um, if we accept that God is the author of this flower, there might be a realization that you are no greater than the flower itself. Mm, oh, 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 that's a whole nother layer. Perhaps even more tainted than it in the first place. Um, Closer to home than the flower is to nature. Yeah, something that, I mean, right. And maybe the answer to why you are further from God than the flower in this poem is that you are in competition with God, right? You're in competition with nature. Something that is in harmony with God is just the flower, is just nature. A garden is a place where man can witness, right, the beauty of nature, where man can witness a closeness to God, can cultivate it, but then man himself is in competition, right? No, no, you're not stretching, Reclusius. Interesting. I think the hand is a flower, fingers like petals. The author thinks he is a flower. That's interesting. I like that. It's not the same thing I was thinking, but it makes sense, right? Hand, petals, flower, right? It kind of makes sense. Even in, this isn't like directly connected, but in like Eastern, like in meditation, there's like what are these called? Mudras, hand things you do with your hands. And like this one, I think, as you're meditating, is like the lotus flower, right? It's like the open lotus flower, and it like means some shit or whatever. But like, you know, it's flower like, right? Or even this is flower like, right? It's like a stem and a middle and petals, right? Um, so I don't think that's a stretch, right? There's many, a lot of precedent for that. Um, One day from inside a flower, a hand emerged and beckoned me to come closer, right? So then it's almost like, well, the flower is the hand, right? And it's more maybe noticing, not so much a hand coming from the flower, but the notion of a hand in the flower, um, perhaps, right? And then a hand of a person, a hand in the flower, the self as the flower, right? The self as a thing below God, the self as a thing subject to nature. Um, because the hand is such a human symbol. I mean, we go back to like ancient cave paintings, and what do we have, right? The hand. And the hand is the thing that creates, the hand is the thing that paints and writes. It's like the thing that differentiates the human uh, as like a tool making, you know, uh, civilization building species is like the opposable thumb in the hand, along with the brain, right? And like the chimpanzee develops the thumb, and then we get humans or whatever. I don't know how it works, um, but like you know that makes sense to me. So the flower, the hand equals the flower, and it's rather like the recognition of the flower as something beyond flower, the flower as something beautiful, which maybe fits with what you said, Ray. I believe hands emerging from flowers are the nymphs, the inspiration and seductive allure of beauty, right? So it's almost like the recognition of beauty within something, right? The ideal transcending the real, right? And then when you realize the ideal and you meet God, right? In a sense, this poem is also like the author meeting God and understanding God. You recognize then man and his place relating to God as even to the flower, right? And maybe even as further, right? As the housemaker, as, right, the challenge against God, the combat, and God has hands, right? So it makes sense, right? This is like the process of becoming. Also, this dude spent 10 years as an ambassador slash diplomat where he became friends with the Dalai Lama. Yeah, I mean, tracks, right? Very mystical. You've already described him as, so it makes sense, right? Um, exactly. This whole time, you were trying to create a flower using a tool, only to realize that the tool you were using is just like the flower itself. It can be pretty beautiful. Or, I am tainted. I am beautiful, or I am. Oh, okay. Yeah. Um, you're either as beautiful as the flower, you have this like self recognition of the perfection of yourself as a brushstroke of God or whatever, right? Um, or you are distant and you were in combat. And that's even what Ray was saying earlier with the other poet. I think you said Huidobro, right? With his more optimism, right? Where you have these two readings. One is, I am a flower, or even like, I am like God, right? Because, like, I am like God, right? I am a creator. I can hold a brush. I can try to create flowers. And I can spend my whole life, right? The mortal commitment of creating a flower, the mortal commitment of becoming God again, right? Or you can have like the optimism, the pessimism of like, I am sin, I am tainted, I have like broken the natural flow. I can self reflect, and thus I have fallen from like every thought I have pulls me out from like, this is very like Taoist, but like the natural flow of things, right? It is my self reflection that like alienates me from nature and nature's natural unfolding, right? um, yeah. Yeah, one can read the ending of the poem as the curse of being a poet. Huidobro is like, I'm like God, and Serrano is, I'm I'm like God. And Serrano is like, I'm like God. Yeah. I'm like God, smiley face, and like, I'm like God. Oh my gosh. This is like the worst outcome ever, and this is like the eternal torment of being a human, right? Um, I pretty much everything I see pretty much everything through the tainted lens. So the positive side is me being charitable. The loss of childhood with the realization makes me lean toward the less positive side here personally. Yeah, I mean, the poem, right? This is maybe where we want to discern what meaning. You know, is this poem optimistic or is this poem pessimistic, right? And we can look back to what is on the page. And we can also maybe look into ourself and the tone and the feeling and these things that are hard to like capture with words. But like I said earlier, right, we have this, um, but the hand did not come. It never returned. My flower could not compare with those in the garden, painted by the good God, right? And so we have this like triplicate like invocation of these negatives, right? Not come, never returned, could not. And I think using this negative language, you know, gives it a tone, a meaning. Maybe we'll say tone more so than meaning. Meaning is more like words on the page, what like the story. So it gives it this tone of like defeat, of like loss, right? There's kind of an agony here, especially when we sort of contrast it against, I spent many days at my task until the flower was finished, right? We remember that this has the sort of magical language. So it creates a positive tone in this, you know, um, what we say, uh, creation, right? The before is positive and the after is quite negative. The before is also simpler. The before has this, next to the house there was a garden. It has playmates, right? Um, oh my gosh, and even right, like the change, right? We have this repetition beginning to end, but it's not a perfect repetition. We have a change. My first playmates were the roots, the leaves, and those spirits of nature who speak to children. At that moment, I ceased to be a child. I could no longer converse with the plants, right? It's no longer playing with the plants. It is conversing, um, because we've lost something, right? From here to here. It's almost as if we can't even conceive of the magic of playing with plants. And it's like this watered down conversing. It's this philosophical thing. Um, right. And then we had this like, I had entered into competition. And this is maybe like the headiest, most like flat out, like self reflective, philosophic part of the piece. I had entered into competition with nature and with the good God without knowing it. I had assumed the mortal commitment of creating a flower. Like all of this is so much more, we can say, like mature than what's at the beginning in the writing, right? And it's much less fun. It's much less bouncy. It's much less lullaby like. Um, so that's maybe another thing. Like the shift of tone through these subtle things is what tells us, this is probably more pessimistic, right? I go for the pessimistic view, but not a hopeless view from the other poems on the book. Serrano sees the world as a decadent place, Kali Yuga, and we must transcend. Yeah, I don't think Serrano was hopeless, right? he's still he's still he calls it a commitment. It's something that must be done. I think the end of this poem implies something to me like action, right? And I think even the fact of titling his poem The First Flower, right? The poem is about the first flower, but the poem itself is maybe also a flower, right? So in that way, um, it almost shows through the end creating a flower, this poem called The First Flower, right? He has this optimism to try. He has this optimism to like do so, right? The circles have circled now. Oh yeah, the circles never stop circling, right? That's the beauty of the circle. um, he was also a Nazi, so yeah, I don't know. The dude is weird. Yeah. Crazy how it's difficult to reconcile, right? That someone creating good art does not mean they were a good person. Um, but this art is still beautiful. I think y'all can maybe tell that I'm enjoying this thoroughly, right? um, and that's why I'm usually an art from artist kind of individual. So I feel like I wanted to say something about the hand. I really wish you didn't say that, lol. But I really fuck with this poem, right? Right? Um, um, I mean, you can still like the poem. It's still such a beautiful piece of art, right? Um, so the hand, because I had another notion of the hand. Um, ah, so something else I thought about the hand. So, and I don't know. I might like, I might actually like your definition, Reclusi, of the hand more than my definition of the hand. But what I was initially thinking, I mean, I still really like this. I think it works as well. And this is why symbols are cool. We can like acknowledge them as multiple things at the same time. That's one of the powers of symbol, is that symbols are fundamentally imprecise and it gives us greater interpretive control as a reader. I was thinking of the hand as a feeling. Okay. Um, One day from inside a flower, a hand emerged and beckoned me to come closer. A child is not frightened by such things. It did not surprise me, therefore, to see the hand. What troubled me instead was that the invitation was to enter the flower. Now, I think enter the flower is a really great piece of evidence for your definition, Reclusi, right? Of man being like the flower, right? Literally entering it, becoming it in some way. I think another way to think about this is the hand as the feeling of, we'll say, like the sublime. Um, the sublime being, right, the feeling of like overwhelming, we'll just say beauty. Um, the sort of, I don't know, the feeling of looking at the stars and recognizing your place in the universe, and simultaneous humility and adoration and reverence and just being enraptured by something, right? Beckons me closer. And I think it makes sense as a hand because whenever I experience art at its most beautiful, and I had this the other day, I was listening to a piece of music and I was doing something else on my computer and the music was going in the background. And then I notice, like, I come up for a second and notice that the music is so overwhelmingly beautiful. And and then I tried to go back to my work or whatever, and I couldn't. And it had grabbed me and it had pulled me out of the life I was living up until that point and demanded that I be present in that artistic moment, right? Uh, and I think, that idea of the hand pulling um, is what the hand initially was for me. And a child isn't frightened by this, but the idea, this feeling, I think disposition might be stronger than feeling for your interpretation here. Disposition ties into the beckoned aspect. Yeah, okay. Yeah, a pull, a feeling makes it less powerful. A disposition, I like that. But it is also a feeling in the chest. Like it has a sensory, like it's always the same for me, accompanied by chills. But it's a thing in my chest, you know. Maybe it's an experience, potentially. I don't know. Um, but it's troubling, right? Because in this moment, in this disposition, in this feeling, whatever word, one becomes entirely enraptured in the world, right? In that same way, I was listening to the piece of music, and once I noticed it, I couldn't look away. And then Imogen was gone, and the world was gone, and it was just this piece. And it was just, I had departed, right? And I think that fits very well with the idea of entering the flower, right? Noticing something so beautiful that it removes one from the body, and you enter it, you become one with that experience, right? And I think that also does fit neatly with our other idea of the hand, because it is that, like, I am the flower kind of thing, but it's more of an experiential, like, being the flower, right? um, and I think this interpretation is really interesting with the context of the next sentence. Shortly afterward, the flower shed its petals. Right? The invitation was to enter the flower. And like I said earlier, it feels to me like there's a gap here. Right? Cyrano doesn't describe that moment. Cyrano doesn't tell us whether he even went into the flower or what it was like to leave the flower, or, there's nothing. It's like a skip. And I think that's very fitting because this, like, sublime moment, one is entirely lost, one is entirely gone, one is entirely present. And I think something I've grappled with personally is that the moment is so perfect that it is impossible to describe in words, right? It is impossible to put that feeling onto a page. At least so far for me, it feels impossible, right? It's so overwhelming. It's so, because it's a loss of self. And how can I come back to the self and then, like, within this limited framework, describe that thing, right? It doesn't work. It's a different world. It's going from, right, physical to ideal, from, incarnated to divine, right? um, uh, and so then he comes back. The flower shed its petals, the flower is gone, and now the feeling is impossible to have again, right? The object of that experience has vanished. And then, right, that frames this poem, right? The commitment of creating a flower then within this interpretation, my initial interpretation is then the action to create a flower would be to, right, have the hand come back up, create something that gives to oneself the same feeling of the sublime, but in a permanent form, right, in an abstracted form of art, so that one can re-experience something that happened before. And I mean, that's even like fits with the poem, right, of like wanting to re-experience the innocence of childhood, wanting to go back to that other state, wanting something that is gone, right? um but you can't, because it's like that's to be an adult, that's to stop being a child. It's to recognize that all things are temporal and all things are mortal, and once something has occurred, it is etched into the past and cannot be reclaimed. um so then, right, that's the competition. It's the competition against death itself. um yeah. At that moment, I ceased to be a child and can no longer converse with the plants, the roots, the spirits, the hands that appear. Entered into competition with the nature and God without knowing it. I assumed the moral commitment of creating a flower. So to create a flower, right, is to create art that is sublime. And I think these are like very similar. These two interpretations are not too far off from each other, and I think they coexist. Like both of these exist at the same time, because like noticing the flower as man and noticing one's, sort of place on the hierarchy of real and ideal, right, is sort of the same thing as the sublime. It's just that these two things are, I guess, happening in different ways, right? Yeah, feeling actually does make sense here. You look at something and finally see it for what it is. You enter the flower and it is beautiful, but the beauty doesn't leave you with a positive experience, so your reality falls apart. Petals fall, you lose your childhood, left with hopelessness. The moral commitment of creating a flower is almost a nod to God, I feel. Um, I am not one that can fathom the extent to what is occurring here, and I only saw that by trying to create a flower and finally seeing the flower itself. Yeah, and failing. Sorry, that's long. No, that's beautiful. Um, like that's a great, yeah, gorgeous. um, yeah, everything collapses, and right, it probably does leave you with hopelessness, and I think that it's also a very hopeful thing. It's a beautiful thing because then it's like I have this opportunity and this chance now to spend the rest of my life post realization trying to create a little flower, right? Trying to create perfection in something tiny, delicate, and subject to death, and then it all just starts going in circles, right? um, and yeah, I think those are two interpretations that work together, right? Um, they work very well together, and I think there are probably other interpretations, but I like those, and I'm satisfied with those for now. Homie had an intense mushroom trip before he wrote this poem. 100%, 100% reclusy. um, but I think it's almost like, well, maybe to write this to capture it, right? Um, um, but like I think the beauty of like experiencing the world this way is that it almost like is having that transcendent experience without the outside aid of the substance. And like psychedelics fuck up a lot of people. Because I think it takes like a lot of like mental work in some capacity to like engage with the sublime and engage with like notions of ego death, and it takes a lot of like self understanding to work up to it, right? And a lot of people take shrooms and it like shortcuts them to that place and it like totally fucks them up. Um, and I have a friend who was telling me about one of his friends um, who took shrooms and like had this like incredible life-changing experience, right? And then like a month later, like his mind like was so entirely different and he like wasn't functional and like it broke him. And then he became like Christian. Um, so there's that. Nothing wrong with becoming Christian after psychedelic ego death. But that's the story, as I was told it. um, I'm psychotic enough without psychedelics, right? Same. Or I've had enough psychosis. Um, I've considered myself God before, right? Which I guess doesn't make me too far from Huidobro. Um, yeah, that's all I have to say to that. Be very careful around psychedelics, right? Yeah. um, so so I think by talking enough about the meaning and like we've gone into tone. It's a very sad ending for the poem, and but the book goes. But as the book goes, he kind of takes on a mystical route. Yeah, and I think it's sad, but it's not, right? It's sad, but it's inevitable, and then it's a chance to like live and try to capture that in adulthood. Certainly, like at best, bittersweet, right? Um, yeah. So the other level I have here is like the essence of the poem, and I think that's really like an artistic experience thing. Like that's when a work makes you cry and there's no way to explain exactly why or what about it is. But maybe that's like the hand, um, if it's there. Um, but why I've divided poems now into these levels, right? Um, my final flower would go harder as a title. That's interesting. Because it's the final flower as a flower, but it's the first flower as a hand, and it's the first flower he created of the many flowers he would create as pieces of art, right? Like every beginning is an end kind of situation. Every end is a beginning. Um, I think the poem would be much more hopeless, right? My first flower versus the first flower? Maybe, but also, right? I mean, the gives it a mysticism maybe to me. The first flower makes it sound like a fairy tale, right? Uh, the golden thread, the the magical sword, the first flower, right? Like I think it gives it that story. My first flower says like this is my thing, but the right puts it out into this world of um like God. But I think that's just for me. Um I think my final flower makes a lot of sense too. And it hammers in the um it does hammer in the pessimism. And I think that's okay. Right? Because I read this differently than you. You might read this more pessimistically than I read it. That's probably the case because I tend to be pretty optimistic whenever I'm reading art and philosophy. Um, so, what is better for you doesn't have to be better for me. You're also allowed to concede and agree with me. That's fine too. The first flower or the impossible flower. That's interesting. Impossible flower. I like first more, I think. Um, impossible. It's very different, right? That makes it, I think maybe the impossible flower places it more in the state of mind of the end, right? Impossible sounds like a word that this person would use. So it's more like philosophic. It's more like um, it has that jaded feeling. Or the finite flower, I think, has a similar feeling to the impossible flower, right? Because the child would use the first flower as the word. The adult would use the finite or the impossible flower, right? um, and I think those are effective. They're definitely effective, but they're effective in communicating something different. The flower that flowered in the flower garden. The flower that flowered in the garden next to the house. um, in the garden next to the house would kind of be an interesting title, as a uh, really pointing the reader toward this constructed, cultivated, natural sort of trinity that happens, right? Because you have, I mean, you don't have flower in that, right? But I don't know, sort of works. um, so something interesting uh, that you said earlier, Reclusi, is that you want to be able to write with more simplicity, right? And the reason I ended up coming up with this structure is because I was thinking about a specific practice of imitating poems, of reading something and using that as inspiration uh, for my own work, right? That's how this like sort of notion came about. And I think that's really useful because we can take a poem like this and it's like beautiful and overwhelming and powerful and lovely. Um, and then it's like, wow, that's great. But like, how does that relate to me as a poet who wants to get better? Right? Like, just analyzing doesn't necessarily force us to take that step of like improving our own art. But when we find something we really like the way that this poem uses simplicity, I think a really valuable exercise, and I've started doing this myself in my own time, is trying to imitate things about the poem. And I divided it this way because there are different levels on which we can imitate something. And by imitate, I mean create our own poem, right? That captures any amount of another poem. And by any amount, I think any amount is very important. Because I could write a poem that is just trying to, or a line, or a stanza. It doesn't have to be a poem. But just write any amount of text that tries to capture, let's say, the whimsy of the alliteration, right? In this, right? I spent many days at my task until the flower was finished, right? That's like something we could try to imitate. I could try to write a poem kind of with that prompt, right? And I can imitate all sorts of the things on the page, right? I could sit down now and write a prose poem, and specifically a prose poem that uses prose, ideally in like the same way that this poem is, right? Prose for the same purpose. Write a poem where the entire thing is all in quotes, or write a poem that, you know, is simple in the way that this poem is simple. Now, that's a much bigger one because simple is a tone, right? I think as we go further down, these get harder to capture. You know, writing a whimsical line is easier than writing a poem that is simple in the way that this poem is simple is, you know, and that is many, many times easier than writing a poem that communicates the same fundamental truth, right, as this poem, right? So we kind of have a tier. Meaning could be, right, like write a poem about a flower in a garden. Anything else can be different. All the other stuff can be different. Or write a poem about, or write a poem that, you know, has the same kind of magical realism. Write a poem about a garden that's next to a house, right? So this is really a method that creates, like, I think, infinite writing prompts, which is really cool, and gives like a very linear way that shows us how to like work up toward sort of more complex ideas, right? Because in this poem, the simplicity exists because it is built upon these layers of other techniques that like factor into it, right? And, the feeling that this is a story, right, is composed of all of these things. And I think this is, I mean, I know this is a really valuable practice because I tried it for the first time 2 days ago and I like learned an immense amount. Um, and I think what I want to do on stream here is try to write myself and invite y'all in chat to write as well. um, and not just to write anything, right? But to write a poem that in some way imitates something that this poem is doing, right? So it could be, like I said, writing a prose poem. That could be the level of imitation. Or it could be writing a poem that discusses the loss of innocence. Or it could be writing a poem about a flower, right? I think these are all like there's like literally thousands of prompts within every poem if you just look for them. So I think this is what I want us to do. We're going to take a break first. And that can be some time to think about maybe what you want to choose. I'll read your message, Reclusi. But we'll come back, I'll like read the poem again, and then I'll talk about what I'm doing, and then I'll kind of write and talk through mine, and then people can, follow along as they wish. I've developed very bad habits. Only started trying writing free verse very recently. I've got boxed in with the idea of needing to rhyme and wordplay being obscure for so long that actually just writing something doesn't happen anymore for me. Feels more like a technical task when I'm trying to incorporate emotion, which is not fun for me anymore. Well, Reclusi, maybe I'd try to invite you to try to write one line or one stanza, or you can keep going after that. And maybe for you, something that would be helpful is to focus on, doing a whimsical little alliteration, one line that is as kind of fairy tale like as my first playmates were the roots, the leaves, and those spirits of nature who speak to children. Right? Keep it small. Doesn't have to be a whole poem. And see where that takes you, right? Because that would be a good way to right, that breaks you from verse, that breaks you from needing to rhyme because maybe you're focusing on alliteration with that task. Maybe you end up rhyming and that's okay, right? But when you focus on one thing and then let everything else be free expression, that might work. And there are other things within this. You could try writing a line of a prose poem or a stanza of a prose poem, because a prose poem is necessarily going to break you out of verse and free verse, right? It's something you've never done before. I mean, maybe you've done it before, but maybe you've never done that before, and it totally shatters that. But I think the most important thing is just choosing one thing, right, and trying to imitate that in a work. But before we do that, we're going to take a break. And y'all can think about your one thing if you're going to join along and do the prompt. You don't have to. I'm also going to take a break and think about my one thing. And I'm also going to stand up, and you are too. And you might get some water or some wine, or go to the bathroom, or do 10 jumping jacks or push-ups or something. You're going to look away from the screen no matter what you do, and you're going to look away from the screen and not pick up a different screen. And then we'll come back and do some writing. That one. Hello. Welcome back. The air conditioning's on now. So now there's noise in the background. Callie, do 100 jumping jacks. So there you go. I did 10 push-ups during the break. I don't know if anyone else has anything to report. Any water or self-care, but... but I did that. I drank water as well and stretched. I did like a back stretch. I just kind of pushed my shoulders together and all just like went cracked and great. Big fan. But we're gonna come back to the poem. And we are going to, some of us maybe, try to use this poem as a writing prompt. Right. And so the prompt, of course, is to write, imitate any number of things in the poem from the poem at any length. So this can be as extreme as trying to write one line that captures the essence of this entire poem. And I do think a line like that can exist. I even mentioned it at the start of stream. William Blake, the labor of ages is to create a little flower, right? So you can try to capture the entire poem within a line. You can try to capture one little thing, the way one word is used, or one bit of alliteration within a line, within a stanza, a whole poem that does that. You could try to say, I'm going to write a whole poem that uses tone the way this poem uses tone. Or you could do, I'm going to write one stanza that uses prose and storytelling in the same way that this poem does. So, extremely flexible as a prompt. And if you want to hang out and just write, you can also just free write, if the prompt doesn't vibe with you. But I anticipate we might be seeing this prompt a lot on streams going forward because I really like this prompt. I think this is the only poetry prompt you would ever need. I feel like this can entertain me for a lifetime. But I'll probably get tired of it in 6 months. So I guess I'll tell you guys what I'm going to do, which I haven't decided yet. But I think I am going to write a prose poem, or some amount of a prose poem, undecided length. Because I haven't written a prose poem in a long time. And I noticed that at the beginning of the stream. And I am going to use the first person, right? So a prose poem that is I and me. And I will put it within quotation marks. I will put the whole thing within quotation marks in the same way that Serrano does, right? So that's my prompt. Y'all can do the same one if you want, but you can also choose any number of other qualities from this work if you would prefer that. So for mine, it is going to be, from our list of things we noticed, prose, first person, and quotes. And I'm going to see if I can write something. And it'll probably be quieter. I probably won't be talking that much. You might hear me muttering along. And if anyone else wants to share what you are going to imitate from this poem, if you're following along with the prompt, feel free to share. You can keep it simple. You can be very complex. It's your choice. Prose, first person, and in quotes. In quotes. And prose in the same way this one uses prose, which really means that it's about telling a story, telling something. Yes, boss. wonder if I should like put on background music. I found an ambient musician who allows all of their stuff to be used for free. Um, but I don't know if it'll like mess up stream. Time for my life I could tell a story about in this same mode is what I'm thinking. It might be the time I stepped on a snail. It has the same kind of like nature, death, loss of innocence thing, which is cool. I feel like I should like keep the prompt on screen, but I'm not sure. Like, I mean, then I could just write it on paper. I think that would be fine. I'm gonna leave the prompt there. some. This is hard. Okay. I think that's enough time to for our little writing prompt. I don't know how long that was. Maybe that was like 10 minutes. If it wasn't enough time, like you can keep writing. It doesn't have to be something long, you know, like it was, one line or a stanza. Um, but I think it's just, a useful way to practice and something that, if any of y'all partook, you can certainly keep working on at your own time, right? In your own time, with your own time, whatever time. Um, I'll share mine. And if anyone did write something on the prompt, that's awesome. That's super cool. Um, I know that y'all signed up for me reading stuff stream, and I, you know, blindsided y'all with a poetry prompt. Um, but so I took this poem, and this first thing that stuck out to me was, that it was prose, and that it felt like it was, this story being told. That was the very first thing we talked about. So I wanted to write something that kind of approached that um, as my sort of personal prompt. Uh, and I didn't title it yet, um, but this is it. Under my foot the snail's shell cracked. Until then, I did not know what death meant. Just that sticks and glass and even bones were brittle things that broke under the world's heaviness. I knew that broken things got swept away to some place I couldn't see by scolding hands. But that time, I was all alone, and the sky painted me in gray. But when the foot moved, I found a mess and knew nobody would clean it up, and the pavement was painted yellow. No title yet. Kind of occupies some of the other same spaces as the first flower of this like recognition of mortality, loss of innocence. It has some of like the whimsical sound, which I find often tends to just seep in when you've been like spending time with a work for a while, as it tends to, you know, many of the parts of it end up leaching in, even if you're only focusing on one part. You're still writing, that's fine, Ray. And that's a really cool thing, I think, about the process of imitation is things tend to, you end up accidentally imitating more than you set out to, which is cool. But I can give you some more time to write, Ray. I don't know if anyone else did the prompt, or is doing the prompts and has written anything or is still writing. If you are, please let me know. But I'll title this, I guess. Man, I even used hands. My father said, until then, I did not know. Put the prompt back over here. I think I'm doing Broken Things as the title of my poem because I like that in the it's within my poem. Um, this is a note to myself for next time, but I should do a little like time limit on the prompt so that people like have an expectation of how long they'll have to write and can look at the clock. I think that would be good because I sort of wrote my thing and then didn't know how long it had been, right? um, and that would probably be good. And we're getting a raid. We're getting a raid from EJ Sean. Welcome in. Um, Currently, we're sort of in the midst of doing a little poetry writing prompt. Uh, so, uh, welcome. I hope your stream was good, EJ Sean. And my stream has been great, and I think the rest of it will be nice too. Yeah, definitely raid and run. Take care of, resting and recuperating from stream. Um, but yeah, for those who are new here, I read poetry and I talk about it on stream. We're 3 hours into a discussion of a poem called The First Flower by Miguel Serrano. Um, we talked about it pretty in depth, and then we were working on a prompt to imitate something that the poem was doing in a work of our own. And that's the kind of thing that happens around here. So if you like talking about poetry and, you know, investigating the meaning of things and talking about philosophical concepts and literary stuff, if you're that kind of nerd, um, this is the place for you. um, it's sort of a we'll say an awkward stream to come into in the middle, perhaps. Um, but I'll read you all this poem, and then I might as well read the poem that I wrote. That I tried to imitate certain things about this poem, and certainly did not capture them. But that's why we practice. We're practicing writing things that don't live up to what's in front of us. But we read this poem called "The First Flower," so if you're coming in, here's some poetry for you. Um, and if you're working on the prompt, then you get to hear it again, and that's nice for you, probably. You clearly hate it here, Nikki. Yeah, absolutely. The first flower. Next to the house, there was a garden. My first playmates were the roots, the leaves, and those spirits of nature who speak to children. One day, from inside a flower, a hand emerged and beckoned me to come closer. A child is not frightened by such things. It did not surprise me, therefore, to see the hand. What troubled me instead was that the invitation was to enter the flower. Shortly afterward, the flower shed its petals. I wanted to gather them and rebuild it, but it was impossible. I then thought of making a paper flower, painting it in bright colors. I spent many days at my task until the flower was finished. I took it to the garden and placed it where the hand had appeared. But if the flower had been well made, the hand would have emerged again. But the hand did not come. It never returned. My flower could not compare to those in the garden painted by the good God. At that moment, I ceased to be a child and could no longer converse with the plants, the roots, the spirits, nor with the hands that appear and disappear in gardens. I had entered into competition with nature and with the good God. Without knowing it, I had assumed the mortal commitment of creating a flower. The First Flower by Miguel Serrano. Yeah, and we talked about all sorts of things that this poem does, that it uses prose, and we talked about some of the philosophical and symbolic meanings going on. Um, but I wrote a little poem as part of our prompt that I was just trying to imitate writing a prose poem, writing in first person, and using quotation marks around the whole thing, because that's something that this poem does. Um, a lot more similarities than that ended up bleeding through. um, so my poem is called Broken Things by me, but after The First Flower by Miguel Serrano. Under my foot the snail's shell cracked. I did not know, until then, I did not know what death meant. Just that sticks and glass and even bones were brittle. Oh, brittle things. Ugh, I can read my own poetry. Brittle things that broke under the world's heaviness. I knew that broken things got swept away to some place I couldn't see by scolding hands. But that time, I was all alone, and the sky painted me in gray. But when the foot moved, I found a mess and knew nobody would come clean it up. And the pavement was painted yellow. Broken things. After The First Flower. So a lot of things ended up bleeding into that. Hands, painting, mortality, prose poem, fairy tale whimsy, you know. I mean, maybe not whimsy, but I mean, there were some little turns of phrase. Ray, are you still writing? Have you reached a point? If not, I mean, you don't have to finish. You can go off on your own. You finished? Do you want to share it? Are you willing to share it? I would be so thrilled if you shared it. I can read it out loud probably if you put it in chat, if it fits, if that won't destroy the formatting, but it's a prose poem, so it probably won't, unless you didn't write a prose poem, because you didn't have to, because you could imitate anything within the poem and it didn't necessarily have to be the prose nature of it. So if you want to send it on the Discord, you can do that too, because I can just pull it up on here and then we can read it. You ever put it on the Discord? Sure. Discord. Da, 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 da. Where have you put it? Maybe you haven't put it yet, and that's okay. Oh, Maytari's poem looks good. It's about the Berlin Wall. That's cool. Okay, let me know when it's in the Discord, or where you're putting it, I guess. Because there are so many places. You can put it in like writing probably. That would make sense. Because that's like the channel where writing is or something. Yeah. I have this notification, so I want to see what this person sent to me. Huh. They sent me a video. That's cool. Yeah. I think it was just me and you who did the prompt, Ray. And that's okay. Because, you know. Oh, you put it in prompts, I think. Sueño. Sueño sin sueño. Okay. Here it is. You're still you're still making edits. Here, I'm gonna put it into. And if you're willing, Ray, I would love to know what you tried to imitate from the original. You already did a prompt today. You can do more than one prompt a day, Nikki. But you also weren't here for most of like the part that the prompt is based off of, so I don't really blame you. Right. Sort of a hard prompt to do if you haven't read the poem or haven't like spent time with the poem. Sueño sin sueño, which is dream without sleep, which this is obviously a very direct example of a translation not capturing kind of the essence of the original, right? This sort of beautiful double meaning, and then this that we don't have, right? Um, but I will read it. Dream without sleep. I half woke, my head still tilted, sleep clinging to my eyes like a warm light that wouldn't quite fade. Okay, so we have like warm light that wouldn't quite, right? Uh, I should just read it. There was a sheet of paper in front of me and a pencil in my hand. Someone had said something, but I couldn't remember what. I drew a simple shape, a flower perhaps, without thinking too much, just to finish and go back. I thought sleep was waiting for me. But the next day they called my name. Since then, every time I close my eyes, sleep returns differently. It no longer greets me. It leaves me with an image, a line, something yearning to be. And it wakes me up. Cool. So we have I can see things in this poem that, you know, potentially, intentionally or unintentionally, right, make reference to that other poem, right? I half woke, my head still tilted, sleep clinging. So we have this still tilted, sleep clinging to my eyes like a warm light that wouldn't quite, eyes light, quite fade. I think it's nice, right? I kind of went for the first flower slash creation moment. Yeah. There was a sheet of paper, right? And we have the paper and the flower on the paper in front of me and a pencil in my hand. Someone had said something, but I couldn't remember what. And there's even this tonal idea or this meaning idea of not being able to remember, right? A change in one's mind. Um, I drew a simple shape, a flower perhaps, without thinking too much, just to finish and go back. And me sleeping through most of my education. Oh, I see. Yeah, head tilted, sheet of paper, someone saying something. Yeah, just to finish and go back. I thought sleep was waiting for me. But the next day they called my name, I see. Since then, every time I close my eyes, sleep returns differently. It no longer greets me. It leaves me with an image, a line, something yearning to be, and it wakes me up. I like that, right? We have this inflection point in the same way where there's a before and after of irrevocable change where, for Serrano, right, it's this, going from innocence to kind of knowing, right? And then for you, right, it's this sleep and then the sleep being fundamentally changed. I think, yeah, I think it's really cool. Um, and of course, the object of this isn't even to write something that has to be good or has to match it. I think this is quite good and quite interesting. I'm not gonna analyze it deeply, right? um, but I think you've probably accomplished the prompt. You've written something that clearly is imitating. And I think this is probably the case where you would get to write on your poem, after um, the first flower or whatever, if you wanted to, um, right? Which you see on poems sometimes, right? And I think what that is when you write something that's been inspired by something or that engages with its ideas in some way. Um, so really, this is writing poems after poems, right? Um, I think that's cool. I think that's particularly cool because it creates this lineage where someone could go read a poem, see that it's after another poem, and then go read that poem to gain more value, right? To gain more understanding of the work, which is why it's particularly compelling to me. Creates this path, and then you could think about writing a poem that's after a poem that's after another poem, and that could be really cool, right? You start to create a chain of inspiration. um, it would be something I thought of the other day, which I thought would be really fun, is to write a poem, have someone write a poem, right? um, and then give it to another person, and that person writes a poem after the original poem, and then they take their poem, the new one, and the prior poem, and they give it to someone else, and they say write a poem after the second poem, right? So that person reads the second poem, they see that it's after another poem, they go read that poem, and then it creates this like compounding layers of meaning. I think would be an incredibly fun thing to do as a, with a number of different writers, because they would surely like go in it would surely go in so many different directions, and like, sort of show that inspiration, you know still involves like a great amount of variety. And I think you can even see that because I wrote a poem inspired by this poem, and you, Ray, wrote a poem inspired by this poem, and they are both very different, right? um, and we've created two very unique art objects that have similarities because they share sort of a place that they originate from, but are both wholly unique and valid, right? Yeah, and yeah, it's a fun process. And I think it's particularly fun because, like, I think either of us could probably go and choose another distinct quality of that poem, um, and try to imitate that thing, right? And end up with something entirely different. Um, when when I was doing this on my own with the Piero poem, something I did was I tried to separate my analysis. So the first thing I looked at in the poem I was reading was just like all of the things on the page, right? The way the words work. And then I wrote a poem that imitated something within that. And then after that, I read the poem again, really focusing on trying to understand the meaning of the work, which only really works if the meaning is somewhat obscured. Like sometimes you can't escape it. But then I like wrote a poem that tried to be about the same thing that that poem was about. And then I read it again, looking at the tone of the poem. And then I'm like, can I write a poem that captures the tone of this poem now, right? Um, and at that point, I got tired, so I only did two. But it was a really, really valuable like exercise, and I ended up writing like something that I never would have, like two things that I never would have expected to write, and actually two things that are like very personal, because analysis is also personal, right? It's about like how we connect with the work in front of us. So whatever I end up finding in something is like originating from my own experience, and then to imitate that is to then necessarily place that back within my experience. And at least for me, today, I mean, I suck at writing poetry on stream, and this got me to write a poem on stream, which is like super hard for me to do, and that wasn't that hard. And I think it at least means that for me, I've found a technique that helps me write. And that's good. I think that's the point of prompts, right? Like, Nikki, you do your prompts, um, which is like, I don't, whatever process you use for your prompts. And that seems to work for you because you do them frequently. But I don't think Nikki's version of poetry prompts would work for me. And there are probably a number of people, many, many people, probably most people, that my process and Nikki's process wouldn't work for either. Um, and that's really special, to like find a thing that makes you want to write, find something that you want to share, want to talk about, and want to do. Um, right? I mean, that's awesome. um, so that's pretty much all for stream. And I don't think I'm gonna like. I'm definitely not gonna be doing like the imitation thing on every stream because it takes a long time, and there are probably times when I would rather read two poems on stream. Right, that was 3 hours, and we'll say 3 hours dedicated to just that one submission, which is cool, right? Um, I really like that poem now because I've spent so much time with it. Yeah, 3 hours. So you know, I'm not going to do that on every stream, but it might be something that I pull out every so often, is this little imitation practice if I feel like writing. And something that I'm really excited about is I think that this process, the imitating a piece, would work really, really well as a poetry workshop. And it's probably going to be a workshop that I kind of do a test run on the Discord server at some point as a workshop taught through there for free. And people can, come to. It'll probably be in like a month or something. um, and then I might, teach that some other time or whatever, or like put it on YouTube or something. But because I think it's a really valuable practice that like might work for some people and it works for me. But the coolest thing, my favorite part about it, is that it merges analysis and writing, right? It places analysis as having a purpose beyond just, like understanding the work. And analysis has purpose on its own, understanding the work, feeling it, getting closer to it. But then it creates like a holistic practice where you're both reading and understanding and writing to create your own work. And this is always something that's troubled me, is sometimes like I'm reading a lot and I'm not writing when I'm doing that. Or I'm writing a lot and I'm not reading. But this like resolves that issue, which is super cool. And as a workshop, right? Take a poem, something fairly simple, read it to the workshop, be like, okay, everyone choose like one, technique, one thing on the page happening, write a stanza, 10 minutes, come back, some people share, then you go deeper and you say, write a short thing that the meaning is the same as this one, and then try to capture tone, and then try to write a poem that like does that in its entirety. And it would be like a great workshop because it's like generative and you're sharing and you're hearing other people's stuff. I think that'd be a very fun thing to teach and to kind of see what comes of it. So stay tuned for that. And sort of as preparation for that, I'm going to slide it into streams here and there to see how it goes, right? See, like for this stream, I realized like having a time limit, at least for when coming back to share stuff, would be useful because then it puts everyone on the same page. And it's not like, when's it going to end, right? Yeah. But that's stream. That is stream. And I thank you all deeply for tuning in. I had a great deal of fun on this stream. I thought it was quite good. I think I learned things. I think I practiced poetry. I think I engaged with new stuff and got to share that time with some people. So that's cool. It was super fun. Awesome. I'm glad that's fun because it's fun for me. And I think if it's fun for other people, that's a good proof of concept that I can keep doing it. And I also think like even that method, if you don't go and imitate, is a very useful way to frame thinking about a work, which is cool. So getting a lot out of it. All it took was getting sick and getting punched. And then I like saying getting punched in the throat. It sounds way more dramatic than like accidentally getting knocked in the throat or whatever. All it took was being, laid out on my floor for a week. And now I come back and I'm all inspired. I think getting sick is actually great because it like you can't do anything. And then it like really, really makes me want to do something once I'm not sick. And it's like this like rush of inspiration. I'm a big fan of getting sick for when it ends. Maybe that's like a callback to my historic cycling between depression and mania, where depression would make me not able to function for 6 months, and then mania would come and I'd be a superhuman for 3 months. And that's that rush is quite powerful. Okay, so I've been Imogen. Thank you all for watching. Thank you, Ray, for sending that work and translation. awesome. Work, awesome. Poem, awesome. And thank you for participating in my little writing prompt. If no one did, that would have, it wouldn't really have made me sad, but it would have been awkward as I'm like talking, like, did anyone write anything? You know, it was very helpful for me. But keep making art you love, and keep finding beauty in the world around you. I think that one might stick. I really like this notion of finding beauty lately. Keep making art you love. Keep finding beauty in the world. I'll see you next time on Saturday, hopefully. Unless there's a stream tomorrow night. There very well might be, and it might be music, and it might be collage, and it might be something else. Who knows? You'll have to wait and see.